The silent delay. There is a moment you know very well. You are not confused. You are not distracted. You know exactly what needs to be done. The task is clear. The step is small. The time is available. And yet nothing happens. You do not actively refuse. You do not decide, I won't do this. You simply pause. You drift. You postpone. I'll start later. Let me first clear my head. I just need to feel a bit more ready. This is the silent delay. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not feel dramatic or rebellious. It feels almost reasonable. That is why it is so dangerous. The silent delay is not the same as laziness. Laziness is disengagement. The silent delay is attachment. You care. You want the outcome. You imagine the future version of yourself who has already done the thing. And still, your body does not move. Inside, there is a subtle tension. Not fear exactly. Not resistance in the usual sense. It is more like an internal pause button has been pressed without your consent. Time continues. Thoughts continue. But action is suspended. Most people misinterpret this moment. They think something is missing. More motivation, more discipline, more clarity, more pressure. So they wait. They wait for the feeling that says now. They wait for the energy that feels clean and certain. They wait for the version of themselves who does not hesitate. But that version never arrives. Because the delay is not caused by lack. It is caused by protection. The silent delay is your nervous system stepping in quietly, saying, this matters, and because it matters, I need to slow this down. You may not hear that sentence consciously, but your body hears it. The delay appears most often around the things that could change something real. Things that would expose you. Things that would redefine you. Things that would move you forward in a way you cannot undo. You rarely procrastinate on what does not matter. You delay what has weight. This is why advice like just start feels insulting. Your system is not refusing to start. It is scanning for safety. When you are about to take an action that carries emotional consequences, your brain does not evaluate logic first. It evaluates risk, not practical risk, psychological risk. What happens to your identity if you try and fail? What happens if you succeed and expectations rise? What happens if you can no longer hide behind preparation? These questions are rarely conscious, but they shape your behavior. So instead of panic, your system chooses delay. Instead of fear, it chooses postponement. Instead of saying no, it says later. The silent delay feels calm on the surface, but underneath, it is charged. You might notice it as heaviness in your chest, or a vague restlessness, or the impulse to check something irrelevant. Your mind fills the space with thoughts. Planning, analyzing, rehearsing, all forms of motion that do not require commitment. This creates the illusion of progress. You feel busy, you feel mentally engaged, you feel like you are working on it, but nothing moves in the external world. This is not accidental. Thinking is safe. Action is exposed. As long as you are thinking, nothing can be judged. Nothing can be measured. Nothing can fail. The silent delay keeps you in a space where your potential remains intact. You are still the person who could do it. You are still the person who might succeed. You are still protected from the reality of outcome. And that protection feels comforting. Until time passes. Days pass like this. Then weeks. Then months. The delay becomes familiar. It blends into your identity. I'm just someone who takes time. I work better under pressure. I need the right mood. These explanations are not lies. They are coping mechanisms. They help you stay aligned with yourself while remaining stuck. The most painful part of the silent delay is not the delay itself. It is the quiet erosion of trust. Each time you postpone, a small internal message is sent. I cannot rely on myself. Not consciously, subtly. You begin to doubt your follow-through. You begin to lower your expectations. You begin to shrink your plans. This is how procrastination reshapes a life without dramatic failure. Not through collapse, through gradual retreat. The silent delay teaches you to live slightly behind your own intentions. You wake up already tired, not from effort, but from carrying undone things in your mind. Your energy leaks into unfinished loops. Your attention is fragmented by what you keep postponing. Rest does not restore you because the tension remains unresolved. You may notice a strange contradiction. When something is finally urgent, you act. You become focused. You become effective. This reinforces the belief that pressure is necessary. But pressure is not the cause of action. It is the override. Urgency temporarily silences the protective system by creating a bigger threat: consequences. So you act not because it feels safe, but because it feels unavoidable. This teaches your nervous system the wrong lesson. It learns that action equals danger, and that safety exists only in waiting. So the next time something matters, the silent delay returns even faster. This is the trap. Not procrastination itself, but the loop it creates. You are not broken for being here. Your system is doing exactly what it learned to do. At some point, delay became the strategy that kept you emotionally intact. Maybe you learned early that mistakes had consequences. Maybe visibility felt unsafe. Maybe success brought pressure instead of relief. The reason does not matter yet. What matters is this: the silent delay is not your enemy, but it cannot be the one making decisions. As long as action waits for safety to be guaranteed, movement will never begin. Safety does not come before action. It is created through gentle, repeated contact with action. Not force, not pressure, not self-attack, but understanding. In the next chapters, we will dismantle this trap carefully. We will look at why motivation fails, why waiting feels logical, and how to step out of delay without violence against yourself. For now, simply notice. Notice the next time you pause without refusing. Notice the moment when later appears. Notice how reasonable it sounds. That is the silent delay. And recognizing it is the first real movement you have made in a long time. Chapter 2: Why Motivation Never Comes. Most people believe they are waiting for motivation. They assume that once motivation appears, action will follow naturally. This belief feels logical, but it quietly keeps the procrastination trap alive. Motivation is treated like a prerequisite, something that must arrive before movement is allowed. And because it rarely arrives on demand, waiting becomes endless. The truth is uncomfortable, but freeing. Motivation is not the cause of action, it is a byproduct of it. The brain does not generate motivation in a vacuum. It generates it in response to movement, progress, and feedback. When nothing changes externally, motivation has nothing to attach itself to, so it stays absent. This creates a loop that feels convincing. You do not act because you feel unmotivated. You feel unmotivated because you do not act. The loop feeds itself quietly and consistently. Motivation is often mistaken for emotional readiness. People think they need to feel confident, clear, energized, or inspired before they begin. But emotional readiness is not a stable state. It fluctuates constantly based on sleep, stress, hormones, memory, and expectation. If action depends on emotional alignment, action becomes rare. The nervous system is designed to conserve energy. From its perspective, starting something uncertain without immediate reward makes little sense. So unless there is urgency or threat, it prefers stillness. This is not a flaw. It is a survival mechanism. Motivation, as people imagine it, would require the brain to override this mechanism without evidence that action is safe or beneficial. That override rarely happens on its own. This is why motivation often appears suddenly when a deadline is close. Urgency creates clarity. The cost of not acting becomes higher than the cost of acting. The brain responds not with inspiration, but with prioritization. This feels like motivation, but it is actually pressure. And pressure is not sustainable. Over time, relying on pressure trains the system to associate action with stress. The mind learns that movement only happens when things are uncomfortable. As a result, calm moments become moments of delay. The absence of stress is misread as a signal to wait. Many people try to manufacture motivation through thinking. They remind themselves of goals, visualize success, or criticize themselves for not doing enough. This creates mental activity, but not movement. Thinking about action does not produce motivation. It often produces guilt, tension, or avoidance. The brain hears these internal commands as noise, not direction. Motivation is closely tied to feedback. When you take a small action and nothing bad happens, the system updates its assessment. Safety increases. When you take a small action and something works, even slightly, the brain receives proof. Proof changes behavior more effectively than intention. This is why motivation tends to appear after you have already started. A few minutes in, resistance softens. Focus sharpens. The body adapts. What felt impossible before movement feels manageable after. But the mind remembers the beginning more vividly than the continuation. It remembers the heaviness of starting, not the ease that followed. So the next time, it waits again. There is also a hidden belief operating beneath the surface that motivation should feel clean and positive. Many people reject the type of motivation that feels messy. The motivation that comes with uncertainty, discomfort, or doubt is dismissed as insufficient. They wait for motivation that feels confident and enthusiastic, but real motivation often arrives quietly. It feels neutral. Sometimes it feels reluctant. It does not announce itself with excitement. It simply shows up as willingness to take one step despite not feeling ready. When this subtle motivation is ignored, the brain learns that only dramatic emotional states are valid signals to act. Those states are rare, so action becomes rare. Another reason motivation does not come is because the task has become symbolically heavy. The mind links the task to identity, worth, or future meaning. Starting no longer feels like doing one thing. It feels like making a statement about who you are. This amplifies hesitation. Motivation avoids tasks that feel like verdicts. The system prefers actions that feel reversible. Low-stakes movement invites motivation. High-stakes meaning repels it. This is why breaking tasks into smaller pieces sometimes helps and sometimes does not. If the smallest piece still carries identity weight, the trap remains. Motivation is not missing because you are weak. It is absent because your system does not yet perceive movement as safe, contained, and reversible. The goal is not to summon motivation. The goal is to change what the system associates with starting. Motivation does not lead. It follows. It follows evidence. It follows safety. It follows repetition. Waiting for motivation is like waiting for confidence before speaking. Confidence is built through speaking, not before it. The same principle applies here. When you stop treating motivation as a requirement and start treating it as feedback, the trap begins to loosen. You are no longer waiting to feel different. You are allowing action to create difference. This does not mean forcing yourself. It means understanding the sequence correctly. Action first, information second, motivation last. The brain needs proof, not promises. In the next chapter, we will look at what actually sits underneath procrastination emotionally, and why delay is often less about time and more about self-protection. Chapter 3. The emotional weight behind procrastination. Procrastination is often described as a problem of time, discipline, or priorities. But time is rarely the real issue. What stops movement is not the clock. It is the emotional weight attached to the task. Beneath delay, there is usually a feeling the system is trying to avoid or manage. That feeling is not always obvious. It may not feel like fear in the dramatic sense. It often feels like tension, vulnerability, pressure, or exposure. The task becomes emotionally loaded long before it becomes practically difficult. You are not postponing the task itself. You are postponing what the task makes you feel. Every meaningful action carries an emotional cost. Starting means facing uncertainty. Continuing means tolerating imperfection. Finishing means allowing evaluation. Each stage activates a different emotional response. For some people, starting triggers anxiety. For others, continuing triggers self-doubt. For others, finishing triggers fear of judgment or loss of control. Procrastination is the system's attempt to regulate these states. It chooses delay because delay keeps the emotional field stable. When you postpone, the feeling is contained. It does not escalate. You remain in a familiar emotional zone, even if that zone is uncomfortable. Familiar discomfort often feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. Many people believe they are avoiding failure, but more often, they are avoiding the internal experience associated with trying. The body remembers past emotional pain more vividly than past success. If at some point effort led to criticism, disappointment, or overwhelm, the nervous system stores that association. It does not analyze context. It remembers sensation. When a similar task appears, the body responds before the mind has a chance to reason. This response may be subtle, a tightening in the stomach, a heaviness in the chest, a drop in energy. The mind then creates explanations to justify the delay. These explanations sound rational. They are not lies. They are post hoc narratives designed to protect emotional equilibrium. Emotional weight also accumulates over time. A task that is postponed repeatedly does not stay neutral. Each delay adds meaning. The task becomes a symbol. It starts to represent unfinished potential, unmet expectations, or self-judgment. What was once a simple action becomes a mirror. Approaching it means confronting the story you have been telling yourself about why it has not been done. This increases resistance. The emotional load grows heavier the longer the task remains untouched. At some point, the weight becomes disproportionate to the action required. This is why small tasks can feel unbearable. It is not their size. It is their history. Procrastination often protects self-image. As long as something is not attempted, it cannot define you. You remain in the space of possibility. The moment you act, you move from potential to reality. Reality is specific. It has limits. For some people, remaining undefined feels safer than risking a concrete outcome. Delay preserves identity flexibility. It allows you to imagine multiple futures without committing to one. This can feel expansive, but it comes at the cost of movement. Emotional weight is also tied to responsibility. Action implies ownership. Ownership implies consequence. For individuals who learned early to manage too much responsibility, delay becomes a way to reduce internal pressure. Procrastination can be an unconscious rebellion against expectations, both external and internal. It says quietly, "I will not carry this right now." Without awareness, this rebellion turns inward. You may begin to criticize yourself for procrastinating, adding another layer of emotional weight. Now the task is associated not only with its original demands, but also with shame. Shame is a powerful immobilizer. It narrows attention. It drains energy. It convinces you that effort will only confirm inadequacy. When shame enters the loop, motivation collapses further. The system chooses avoidance to prevent emotional injury. It is important to recognize that procrastination is not a lack of care. It is often the opposite. You delay because you care about the outcome, about how it reflects on you, about what it means. Tasks that carry no emotional meaning are rarely postponed. The ones that linger are the ones tied to values, identity, or change. This is why advice that treats procrastination as indifference feels inaccurate. The emotional system is highly engaged. It is working hard to maintain balance. Understanding this changes the approach. If procrastination is emotional regulation, then forcing action without addressing the emotional load creates internal conflict. You may push yourself forward, but the system resists. This resistance can show up as exhaustion, distraction, or sudden loss of interest. Sustainable movement requires reducing emotional weight, not overpowering it. This does not mean eliminating emotion. It means making it tolerable. One way emotional weight is reduced is through containment. When a task feels infinite or identity-defining, the emotional response escalates. When it is framed as limited, reversible, and specific, the system relaxes. Emotional safety increases when the mind knows that an action does not require a final verdict on your worth. Another way emotional weight is reduced is through self-relationship. When your internal response to difficulty is harsh, tasks become threatening, the system anticipates self-attack and chooses avoidance. When your internal response is neutral or supportive, the risk of emotional harm decreases. Procrastination is less likely when the system trusts that effort will not be punished internally. Emotional weight is also influenced by pace. Moving too quickly can feel overwhelming. Moving too slowly can feel stagnant. The system responds best to rhythms that allow adjustment. Sudden demands for transformation often trigger delay because they exceed emotional capacity. Gradual movement respects regulation. It allows the nervous system to update its expectations based on experience rather than fear. It is also important to notice that emotional weight is not always negative emotion. Sometimes it is positive emotion that feels unsafe. Excitement, hope, or anticipation can be destabilizing if you are not accustomed to expansion. For some, success feels more threatening than failure because it requires maintaining a new level of self. Delay keeps you in familiar territory. This is rarely acknowledged, but it is common. Procrastination protects against emotional states you do not yet know how to hold. Recognizing the emotional function of procrastination changes the question. Instead of asking, "Why can't I just do it?" the more useful question becomes, "What emotional state is this task asking me to tolerate?" The answer may be uncertainty, vulnerability, visibility, or responsibility. Once identified, that state can be approached gradually rather than avoided entirely. Emotional capacity grows through exposure, not avoidance. The system learns by experience that feelings can be survived. Each small action that does not result in emotional harm recalibrates the response. The emotional weight decreases not because the task changes, but because your relationship to the feeling changes. Procrastination loosens when action no longer feels like an emotional threat. This is not achieved through pressure or self-judgment. It is achieved through understanding, containment, and trust building. In the next chapter, we will explore one of the most persistent illusions that keeps the trap intact: the belief in the right time, and why waiting for it silently reinforces delay. Chapter 4. The Illusion of the Right Time. One of the most convincing reasons for delay is the belief that there will be a better moment to begin. A time when you feel clearer, a time when you feel calmer, a time when conditions are more supportive. This belief feels responsible, even wise. It suggests patience and discernment rather than avoidance, but the idea of the right time is one of the most powerful illusions keeping the procrastination trap intact. The mind imagines a future moment where internal resistance disappears and action feels natural. That imagined moment becomes a reference point. Everything before it feels premature. Everything now feels slightly wrong. So you wait. The problem is that the right time is not a fixed destination. It is a moving target shaped by internal state. When your nervous system is cautious, no time feels right. The criteria keep shifting. You wait for more energy, then more clarity, then more confidence. Each condition feels reasonable on its own. Together, they create indefinite postponement. The belief in the right time assumes that internal readiness precedes action. But readiness is not something that arrives fully formed. It is something that emerges through engagement. The system cannot feel ready for an experience it has not entered. It can only predict based on past patterns. If past action was associated with discomfort, the prediction remains negative. Waiting does not change that prediction. It reinforces it. The illusion is strengthened by comparison. You notice moments when others seem to act effortlessly. Their timing looks perfect from the outside. What you do not see is the internal friction they moved through, or the small starts that preceded visible momentum. You compare your internal hesitation to their external action and conclude that you are simply not there yet. This reinforces waiting as a strategy. The concept of the right time also protects against regret. If you act at the wrong time and things go poorly, the mind fears it will blame itself. Waiting feels safer because it preserves the narrative that you are being careful. But this protection is incomplete. Regret does not only come from action, it also comes from inaction. Over time, the cost of waiting accumulates quietly. The mind rarely anticipates this cost accurately. The right time is often imagined as a time without resistance, but resistance is not a sign that timing is wrong. It is a sign that something meaningful is happening. The body responds to change with friction. That friction does not disappear with time alone. It disappears through gradual exposure. When you wait for resistance to vanish before acting, you are asking the system to change without evidence. It cannot do that. The illusion persists because waiting feels active. You may be preparing, organizing, or thinking. These activities give the sense that you are moving toward the right time. But preparation without contact becomes another form of avoidance. The mind stays busy while the core fear remains untouched. The right time becomes a justification rather than a plan. Another aspect of this illusion is the belief that you will feel more like yourself later, as if there is a truer version of you that will emerge under better conditions. But identity is not discovered in stillness. It is shaped through action. The self you are waiting for is formed by the very steps you are postponing. There is no future version who begins effortlessly. There is only the version who begins despite uncertainty. The nervous system prefers predictability. The present, even if uncomfortable, is familiar. The future implied by action is unknown. Waiting maintains the known. The right time becomes a way to stay anchored to familiarity. This is not a conscious choice. It is a regulatory one. The system delays change until it feels unavoidable or safe. The irony is that safety is created by repetition. Each small step taken updates the system's expectations. Each step not taken keeps the prediction unchanged. The right time never arrives because the conditions required for it are created by acting, not waiting. This does not mean timing is irrelevant. There are moments when rest is needed and capacity is genuinely low, but true low capacity feels different from the illusion of wrong timing. Low capacity feels heavy but honest. The illusion feels restless and argumentative. It is filled with reasons. When timing is truly wrong, forcing action leads to collapse. When timing is wrong because of the illusion, gentle action leads to relief. Learning to distinguish between these states is part of leaving the trap. The right time belief also externalizes responsibility. It places the cause of delay in circumstances rather than in internal readiness. This feels less threatening, but it removes agency. If action depends on a future moment you cannot control, you remain passive. Reclaiming agency means accepting that no moment will feel perfectly aligned. Action always includes an element of friction. Waiting for alignment is another way of asking for certainty in an uncertain process. The system does not need certainty. It needs containment. It needs to know that action will be limited, reversible, and survivable. When those conditions are present, timing becomes less important. Movement becomes possible even in imperfect moments. The right time illusion dissolves when you stop asking, "Is now perfect?" and start asking, "Is this step small enough to tolerate now?" This reframing shifts the focus from global readiness to local capacity. You are no longer waiting for a future state. You are working with the present one. The trap loosens not because time changes, but because your relationship to timing changes. You stop outsourcing action to an imagined future. You bring it back into the present, where adjustment and feedback are possible. In the next chapter, we will examine how this trap rebuilds itself even after progress has been made, and why awareness alone is not enough to prevent relapse without a new internal structure. Chapter 5. How the trap keeps rebuilding itself. Even when you begin to understand procrastination, it does not simply disappear. Awareness alone rarely dismantles the trap. Many people experience a brief period of movement after insight, followed by a quiet return to delay. This can feel confusing and discouraging. You may think, I know what's happening now. Why am I back here? The answer is simple but uncomfortable. The trap is not maintained by misunderstanding. It is maintained by habit at the level of the nervous system. Understanding changes how you think about the problem. It does not automatically change how your system responds under pressure. The trap rebuilds itself through repetition, especially during moments of emotional load. When life becomes demanding, when expectations increase, or when uncertainty rises, the system reaches for familiar strategies. Delay is familiar. It has worked before to regulate internal states, so it returns, quietly and efficiently. The mind may protest, but the body defaults to what it knows. This is why progress often feels fragile. You move forward, then something destabilizes you, and the old pattern reappears. This does not mean you failed. It means the system is still learning. Procrastination is not a single decision. It is a pattern reinforced through thousands of small moments. Each time delay reduces discomfort, it is rewarded internally. Each time action feels overwhelming, avoidance is reinforced. Over time, this creates a loop that operates automatically. The trap rebuilds itself because it is efficient. It conserves energy. It reduces immediate emotional risk. From the system's perspective, it is doing its job. Awareness threatens this job. It introduces uncertainty. So the system looks for ways to reassert control. One way it does this is by changing form. Procrastination does not always look the same. When you become aware of obvious avoidance, the system may shift to more socially acceptable versions. Over-preparation, endless research, optimizing instead of starting, waiting for better tools. These behaviors feel productive, but they serve the same function: delaying exposure. The trap survives by adapting. Another way the trap rebuilds is through success. When you manage to act and something works, expectations often increase. The next task carries more weight. Visibility increases. Stakes rise. The system recalculates risk. What once felt manageable now feels threatening. Delay returns, not because you cannot act, but because acting now means more. Success expands identity. Expansion requires regulation. Without it, the system retreats. This is why people often stall after progress. The trap is not pulling you backward. It is responding to growth without sufficient containment. The trap also rebuilds through self-judgment. When you notice procrastination and respond with criticism, you add emotional weight. The system anticipates that effort will lead to internal punishment. Delay becomes protective again. Awareness combined with harshness strengthens the loop. Awareness combined with neutrality weakens it. The internal tone matters more than the insight itself. Another rebuilding mechanism is urgency cycling. After periods of delay, you may push yourself hard to catch up. This creates bursts of productivity driven by stress. While this feels effective in the short term, it reinforces the association between action and pressure. The system learns that movement requires threat. When pressure disappears, so does action. The trap is restored. Sustainable movement requires a different association: action paired with safety. Without this, the system alternates between collapse and urgency. Neither creates lasting change. The trap also persists because identity lags behind behavior. Even when you act differently, you may still think of yourself as someone who procrastinates. This identity shapes expectation. Expectation shapes behavior. Subtle doubt creeps in. This won't last. The system senses inconsistency and prepares for failure. Delay reappears as a way to align behavior with self-image. Identity updates slowly. It requires repeated evidence. Each small action taken without self-attack contributes to this update. The trap rebuilds most strongly when actions are treated as tests. When every effort feels like proof of worth or failure, the emotional stakes are high. High stakes trigger protection. protection triggers delay. The system prefers environments where outcomes are contained. This is why low-pressure repetition is more powerful than dramatic breakthroughs. Breakthroughs inspire. Repetition rewires. The trap cannot survive consistent, tolerable action paired with neutral self-response. It survives intensity, inconsistency, and self-judgment. Understanding this reframes relapse, returning. To delay does not erase progress. It reveals where regulation is still needed. Each return provides information. What increased the emotional load? What changed the stakes? What shifted internally? These questions turn relapse into data rather than failure. The goal is not to eliminate the trap completely. The goal is to reduce its authority, to notice when it reappears without surrendering decision-making to it. Over time, the trap loses speed. Delay shortens. Recovery quickens. The system learns that movement does not require crisis. This learning happens through structure, not willpower. Through predictable steps, consistent pacing, and compassionate internal response. Awareness opens the door. Structure keeps it open. In the final chapter, we will focus on what it means to become the person who starts without force, and how identity shifts when action is no longer driven by pressure or avoidance. Chapter 6. Becoming the person who starts without forcing. The goal is not to become someone who never feels resistance. That person does not exist. Resistance is part of being human, especially when something matters. The real shift happens when resistance is no longer in charge of your decisions. Becoming the person who starts without forcing is not about eliminating discomfort. It is about changing your relationship to it. For most of your life, action may have been paired with pressure, deadlines, urgency, fear of consequences, self-criticism. This pairing taught your nervous system that movement is dangerous and costly. So it protected you through delay. To move without forcing, the system must learn a new association. Action can coexist with safety. This learning does not happen through insight alone. It happens through experience. Small, repeated experiences where action does not lead to punishment, collapse, or overwhelm. The person who starts without forcing is not more disciplined. They are more regulated. They do not rely on motivation or emotional readiness. They rely on structure that supports the nervous system. This structure is quiet. It does not involve dramatic promises or high expectations. It involves clear boundaries. How much? How long? What counts as done? When these parameters are defined, the system relaxes. Uncertainty decreases. Action becomes more approachable. Starting without forcing also requires redefining success. If success is defined as doing everything perfectly or finishing everything quickly, pressure remains. Pressure invites avoidance. When success is defined as contact rather than completion, the emotional stakes drop. Contact means showing up briefly, imperfectly, without demand for outcome. The system learns that engagement does not require full commitment. This makes starting possible even on difficult days. Over time, these small contacts accumulate. They build familiarity. Familiarity builds safety. Safety allows movement. Identity shifts slowly through consistency. You do not become a different person because you decide to. You become a different person because your system gathers evidence. Each time you start without force, even for a few minutes, a new data point is added. I can begin without crisis. I can move without pressure. I can stop without punishment. These messages reshape self-perception. The identity of someone who procrastinates weakens not through rejection, but through irrelevance. It no longer matches experience. Becoming the person who starts also involves letting go of dramatic narratives. You do not need a breakthrough moment. You do not need to feel transformed. Change at the nervous system level is subtle. It feels anticlimactic. You may expect to feel confident or empowered, but instead you feel neutral. Neutral is progress. Neutral means the system is no longer alarmed. It means action has become ordinary. This is the deepest shift. The absence of drama is a sign of integration. Another key aspect is self-trust. Trust is not built by keeping promises to an ideal future self. It is built by making promises that your present self can keep. When you consistently ask for more than you can tolerate, you break trust. When you ask for what is manageable, trust grows. The person who starts without forcing does not overcommit. They commit realistically. They leave space for fluctuation. They do not interpret low energy as failure. They adjust without self-attack. This flexibility keeps the system engaged rather than defensive. Starting without forcing also means allowing rest without guilt. Rest that is earned through exhaustion reinforces the idea that action must be paid for with depletion. Rest that is chosen intentionally teaches the system that care is available. When rest is safe, action becomes safer too. The nervous system does not need to hoard energy through delay if it trusts that recovery is allowed. Over time, this trust changes behavior more effectively than discipline ever could. You may notice that you begin to start earlier, not because you push yourself, but because delay no longer offers relief. Action feels lighter than avoidance. This is not because tasks became easier, but because the internal cost of avoidance increased. Carrying undone things feels heavier than engaging with them briefly. This is a sign that the trap is losing its grip. You are no longer motivated by fear or urgency. You are guided by regulation and clarity. Becoming the person who starts without forcing does not mean you will never delay again. It means delay will no longer define you. It will be a signal, not a command. When it appears, you will recognize it. You will understand what it is protecting. And you will respond with containment rather than surrender. This is the difference between being trapped and being informed. The trap thrives on misunderstanding and self-judgment. It dissolves in understanding and consistency. The person you are becoming is not someone who acts all the time. It is someone who can act when it matters, without needing to be pushed by fear. This shift is quiet. It may not feel impressive, but it changes everything. Action becomes part of life rather than a battle against it. And once that happens, procrastination no longer controls the direction of your days. It becomes background noise. Something you notice, acknowledge, and move past. That is what freedom from the trap actually looks like.